The morning sun had barely crested the rooftops of Brookhaven Meadows when Marcus Hall stepped onto his porch, coffee steaming in one hand, the other resting lightly on Jasper's leash. The quiet rhythm of suburban life was still something he was trying to get used to. Just 6 months earlier, Marcus had been across the ocean, navigating terrain where silence meant survival and trust was a matter of life and death. Here, in this manicured neighborhood outside Charlotte, silence carried a different weight. It official, curated, sometimes masking the judgment that lay behind closed blinds. Marcus had chosen Brookhaven Meadows because it looked like peace, a modest single-story home with faded green shutters, a small front yard that needed little more than a weekly trim, and neighbors who mostly waved politely before disappearing back into their lives. It wasn't flashy, and Marcus didn't want flashy. After years of service in special forces, after nights spent remembering the faces of men who hadn't come home, all he wanted was space. Space to breathe, space to heal. But peace, as Marcus was beginning to learn, had its own price here. And that price often came in the form of the HOA. He hadn't had much run-ins with them until that week. But the name Linda Crawford had been whispered to him by neighbors enough times that he knew to brace himself. Linda was one of those figures who needed control like oxygen. She was in her early 50s, short blonde bob, the type of woman who wore pearl earrings to water her lawn, and carried a clipboard as if it were an extension of her arm. People joked she'd been born holding bylaws in one hand and a citation in the other. To Marcus, she was just another gatekeeper who measured power not by kindness, but by how many people she could put in their place. The knock came earlier than he liked. 7:20 a.m., he'd just set his mug on the railing when it rattled against the wood. Jasper gave a short bark, low and warning. Marcus sighed, already sensing what was waiting for him on the other side. When he opened the door, there she was. Linda Crawford, lips pursed so tightly they looked like they might disappear. Clipboard clutched against her chest like it contained nuclear codes. "Mr. Hall," she began, her voice saccharine and sharp all at once. "We need to talk." Marcus leaned casually against the doorframe, projecting calm, though he already felt the weight of annoyance stir in his chest. "It's not even 7:30, Linda. Whatever it is, it can wait until people have had their coffee." She ignored him, bulldozing past pleasantries. With a flick of her manicured hand, she thrust a folded piece of paper toward him. "This is an official notice from the HOA." He unfolded it, eyes scanning the sterile typed font. His brow furrowed. "Your attire," Linda said crisply, as though she'd been rehearsing the line, "is in violation of our neighborhood's guidelines." Marcus blinked. "My attire?" She gave a pointed glance at his camouflage jacket, the one he'd worn countless times overseas, the one that felt like second skin. "Military camouflage," she clarified. "It disrupts the visual harmony of Brookhaven Meadows. It may even intimidate other residents." For a long moment, Marcus stared at her, the absurdity hitting like a punchline to a cruel joke. "You're telling me I can't wear camo in my own driveway?" "It's not personal," she insisted, though the tightness around her eyes betrayed something uglier. "It's about maintaining a neutral aesthetic. Our policy clearly states." Marcus cut her off with a sharp laugh, the sound rough and bitter. "Linda, do you have any idea who I am?" "I don't care if you're the mayor," she snapped, her tone hardening. "Rules are rules." Behind him, Jasper gave another low growl, as if echoing Marcus's simmering frustration. He could feel his pulse quicken, not from fear, but from a familiar fire one he thought he'd left overseas. Inside, he heard movement. His younger cousin Elijah, who'd been staying with him for a while, emerged from the kitchen holding his own coffee. Elijah was 22, fresh out of college, and had always looked up to Marcus like a second father. "What's going on?" Elijah asked. Marcus handed him the letter. Elijah scanned it, his expression twisting into disbelief. "Waiter, they serious? They don't want you wearing camo after everything you've done for this country." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Apparently, it disrupts the visual harmony." Elijah shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable." Linda's lips tightened. Further, this isn't a debate. If it continues, there will be consequences. She delivered the last word like a threat, and for a moment, Marcus saw something deeper flicker in her eyes. Not just obsession with rules, something personal, something about him, his uniform, his skin that she couldn't tolerate. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to be, simply folded the paper neatly, slid it into his pocket, and looked her square in the eye. "You're making a mistake." Linda stiffened. "We'll see." Then she spun on her heel, storming back across her perfect lawn, already pulling out her phone. Marcus watched her retreat, a bitter taste in his mouth. He'd fought battles against men who carried rifles, but this was a different kind of fight, one that cut deeper because it came from the place he was supposed to call home. That evening, Marcus sat on the porch, staring at the sunset bleeding across the Carolina sky. He wasn't angry yet, but the frustration simmered low, like coals. Waiting for oxygen, he thought of his brothers in arms, the men who had stood shoulder to shoulder with him, who had faced worse and survived. He thought of the look in Linda's eyes, not just disdain for his uniform, but for him. For the fact that a black man could stand tall and unshaken in a neighborhood she believed belonged to her kind. Elijah sat beside him, quiet for a while, then said softly, "She picked the wrong fight, didn't she?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He took a sip of his coffee, letting the warmth ground him. Finally, he said, "She picked the wrong man." The days that followed only deepened the standoff. Linda doubled down, sending emails to the HOA board, rallying her small circle of loyalists, drafting language about neighborhood attire as if she were rewriting the Constitution. But Marcus wasn't idle either. He began documenting everything, every letter, every word, every sideways glance. Old instincts kicked in, the same ones that had kept him alive in places where one mistake meant not coming home. He wasn't going to swing blindly, he was going to be deliberate. And then, one morning, as he tied his boots and shrugged into his jacket, an idea sparked. Not out of spite, but out of principle. If Linda wanted to make his camo the enemy, then he'd remind her what it truly represented. That weekend, Brookhaven Meadows witnessed something it had never seen before. Marcus didn't just step outside in camo. He was joined by 4 of his former Special Forces brothers. They'd driven hours, some states away, to see him. Tall, disciplined men of every background, black, Latino, white, all in camo, all standing side by side in his driveway, laughing, grilling, tossing a football with Elijah. Swapping stories like they were back at base. The sight sent ripples through the neighborhood, curtains twitched. Kids pointed. Even some neighbors walked over, hesitant at first, then smiling when they realized these men weren't here to intimidate, they were here to live, to share, to show what brotherhood looked like. Linda, of course, was livid. She stood frozen on her porch, phone in hand, mouth tight. As if the world she'd built out of rules and prejudice was cracking. She typed furiously, no doubt drafting another complaint. But when she finally stormed across the street, clipboard clutched like a shield, Marcus met her halfway, his brothers standing quietly behind him, not threatening, but present, a wall of lived experience and unshakable dignity. "This isn't a show of force," Marcus told her calmly, his voice steady, carrying just enough for the neighbors watching to hear. "This is a reminder. These men, and millions like us, wore this uniform so people like you could enjoy your manicured lawns and your peace, and you will not take that from us." For a moment, Linda faltered, the weight of eyes on her, the undeniable truth in his words. It stripped her of the armor she thought her clipboard gave her. But Karen types rarely surrender easily. She recovered quickly, chin jutting out. "Rules are rules. And if you think your uniform puts you above them, you're mistaken." Marcus didn't smile. He didn't blink. He simply said, "No, Linda. This uniform doesn't put me above the rules. It's what made the rules possible." The neighborhood was silent except for the crackle of the grill. And in that silence, a shift began, not just in Marcus's fight with Linda, but in the hearts of the neighbors who had been watching from behind their blinds, wondering whose side they should be on. By Monday morning, Brookhaven Meadows was buzzing like a hornet's nest. Word of Marcus's weekend gathering had spread faster than Linda could type her furious emails. Some neighbors whispered about how imposing it looked, but more than a few admitted quietly, cautiously, that it was one of the most respectful, genuine get-togethers they'd seen in years. The smell of barbecue, the sound of laughter, the sight of old soldiers enjoying a rare slice of piece-it was hard to call that a crime. Linda, of course, saw it differently. By midweek, Marcus found not one, but 3 letters in his mailbox. Each carried the HOA's sterile header and the same condescending tone. One cited him for disruptive gatherings. Another accused him of displaying attire inconsistent with community standards. The third was the most absurd, creating an intimidating environment for residents. Elijah read them aloud, his voice dripping with disbelief. "They're trying to make hanging out with your friends illegal." Marcus chuckled dryly. "Not illegal, just inconvenient." "But why though?" Elijah pressed. "This isn't about rules anymore. This is about you." Marcus nodded slowly, his jaw tight. He'd felt it too, that undercurrent that went beyond bylaws and aesthetics. It wasn't just his uniform Linda couldn't stomach. It was the man wearing it. A black man standing tall in a neighborhood she believed should bow to her clipboard. When the HOA announced a special meeting for Friday night, Marcus knew it was coming. The showdown. The meeting room at the clubhouse was a beige box that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and stale coffee. Folding chairs lined the floor, already filled with curious neighbors who'd heard enough whispers to want front row seats. The board sat at a long table up front, Linda at the center like a queen presiding over her court. Susan Miller, her closest ally, sat stiffly beside her, while Mr. Hernandez and Mrs. Kimtu, board members with less appetite for drama, looked uneasy. Marcus entered calmly, Elijah at his side. He didn't wear his camo that night. Instead, he wore a plain button-down shirt and dark jeans. Not because he was intimidated, but because he wanted to make one thing clear. This fight was never about fabric. Linda cleared her throat, her voice ringing sharp in the room. "This meeting has been called to address multiple violations of HOA policy committed by Mr. Marcus Hall." The words hung heavy. Marcus kept his face neutral. Linda launched into a list, her tone growing louder with each infraction: unauthorized attire, unauthorized gatherings, disruptive influence. Her voice dripped with contempt, and though she never said the words outright, the implication was clear. "You don't belong here." Finally, she slammed the folder shut. "We are recommending a fine of $500 and escalating action if not continues." A murmur rippled through the room. $500 for what? For grilling with friends? For wearing the same uniform he'd bled in overseas? Marcus stood slowly. He didn't shout, he didn't need to. His voice carried, steady and strong. "You're trying to fine me for wearing the uniform that defended your right to sit in that chair. For gathering with the men who kept your children safe at night, and you call that disruptive?" Linda smirked coldly. "This isn't about your service. This is about rules." "No," Marcus said firmly. "This is about respect. And you don't have it, not for me, not for what I represent, and certainly not for this community." Elijah stood too, fire in his young eyes. "You all talk about harmony, but what you mean is conformity. You want everyone to look the same, act the same, live the same. But that's not harmony, that's control." For a moment, silence. Neighbors shifted in their seats, some nodding quietly, others looking away. Then, from the back, a voice spoke up. It was Mr. Davis, a retired postal worker. "I served in Vietnam," he said, his voice rough with age, "and I'll be damned if I sit here and watch you punish a man for wearing his uniform. You should be thanking him." A ripple of agreement followed. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived 2 houses down, added, "I was at that barbecue. It wasn't intimidating. It was the first time I felt like this neighborhood was actually alive." Linda's face reddened, her control slipping. "This is not a popularity contest," she snapped. "The HOA has rules, and those rules are binding." That's when Marcus pulled a folder from his bag and laid it gently on the table. "And yet, Federal law outranks your bylaws. The Service Members Civil Relief Act prevents discrimination in housing against active duty and veterans. I called my attorney. I called my brothers in arms, and if you keep pushing this, Linda, you're not just fighting me, you're fighting them. He nodded toward the door. At that moment, two men stepped inside, his former unit brothers, dressed not in camo, but in pressed suits. They carried themselves with quiet authority, their presence filling the room. Special Forces veterans, Marcus introduced them. They're here because they know exactly what this uniform means, and because they don't take kindly to seeing one of their own harassed for wearing it. The air shifted. Bravado faltered. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For once, the clipboard in her hand wasn't a weapon, it was a shield full of holes. Mrs. Kim leaned toward the mic, her voice calm but firm. I don't think this board has the authority to pursue this any further. I move that we dismiss these complaints. I second it, Mr. Hernandez said quickly. The vote passed before Linda could even recover. 2 in favor, 2 against. The tie was broken by the HOA president, Mr. Walker, who had been silent until now. He looked tired, weary of the circus. Enough, he said simply. This is harassment. The complaints I dropped. The gavel fell. The meeting adjourned. Marcus exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He hadn't won just for himself. He'd won for every neighbor who'd ever felt steamrolled by Linda's tyranny. As he walked out, Elijah clapped him on the back. Uncle Marcus, you didn't just stand your ground, you made history tonight. Marcus smiled faintly. History's nothing new to us. We've been making it for a long time. The days after the meeting felt different in Brookhaven Meadows. The air seemed lighter, as if a storm had passed and left the neighborhood washed clean. Marcus noticed it in the way people waved, now longer, warmer. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped by. With homemade cornbread, Mr. Davis, the Vietnam vet, came over one morning just to shake his hand again. Even the kids who used to dart away on their scooters lingered a little, curiosity in their eyes replaced with respect. Linda, on the other hand, was unraveling. Her flyers about community values went unread. Her angry emails were ignored. At one point, she even tried posting signs about inappropriate attire. But the board quietly took them down before sunrise. The clipboard queen had lost her crown, and she knew it. By the following month, a for sale sign appeared. On her perfect lawn, the night the moving truck pulled in, Marcus sat on his porch with Elijah and Jasper. He watched silently as Linda barked orders at the movers, her pearl earrings catching the last glint of sunset. For a brief second, her eyes met his across the street. There was no victory in Marcus's gaze, no gloating, just calm. She turned away quickly, muttering something under her breath before disappearing into the house she no longer controlled. Elijah broke the silence. Think she ever admit she was wrong? Marcus smiled faintly. Some people would rather carry bitterness than admit they were wrong. But that's not our burden to carry. That weekend, Marcus hosted a barbecue of his own. Not a protest, not a statement, just a gathering. Neighbors came, kids ran barefoot across lawns, music floated through the air. For the first time since he'd moved in, Brookhaven Meadows felt like a community. People shared stories, not just about Linda, but about years of silent frustrations they'd never dared voice. And as the laughter rose under the Carolina sky, Marcus felt something stir inside him, peace. Not the fragile artificial peace of manicured lawns and rigid rules, but real peace. The kind that comes when respect finally takes root. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the embers in the grill had faded, Marcus sat back in his chair, eyes fixed on the stars. Elijah leaned against the porch railing, his voice quiet. You think it's over? Marcus considered it. Conflicts never really end. There's always another challenge, another test. But you know what matters. What? Elijah asked. Marcus's voice was steady, low but certain. That we don't let anyone take our dignity. That we remember patience isn't weakness. And that sometimes, standing firm isn't just about usits, about showing others they can stand too. Elijah nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. And for the first time, the young man seemed to understand that what had just happened wasn't just a neighborhood spat, it was a lesson in resilience, in history, in carrying yourself with honor even when others try to strip it away. As Marcus finally stood, calling Jasper inside, he glanced once more at the quiet street. He thought of his brothers still serving overseas, of the men who hadn't come home, of the battles fought both abroad and here at home. And he knew he had kept faith with all of them by refusing to bow. The fight with Linda would be remembered, maybe even retold with a chuckle at neighborhood gatherings. But for Marcus, it wasn't about winning, it was about respect. Respect for himself, for his service, for his place in a world that had often tried to tell men like him they didn't belong. And that respect, once earned, couldn't be taken back. The lesson from this story is clear. Patience and self-respect are never weakness. Sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to hold their ground, and an entire community begins to change. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like this, real stories, human stories, lessons worth remembering, waiting just for you.